Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 16th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the storylines around all of the teams as they head into the playoff, give one for each team that I think is probably the biggest one for each of these teams. Then we'll get to a little bit of Heisman roundup. Travis Hunter wins the closest contest since 2009. Want to break it down and why some of the reaction is just downright ridiculous, but we'll get into that here in a second. Then we'll get to a little bit of a weekend roundup. We'll talk about the Navy-Army game, the couple of bowl games that happened, as well as the FCS quarterfinals. We have a little bit of a lull here. Might as well give some love to the FCS teams down there. Then we'll get to the transfer portal. A ton of commitments that happened this past weekend, so we'll roll through that pretty quickly. If I had to imagine, a lot of different things to get to there. And then we'll do a little bit of a weekend roundup. All the headlines that happened this past weekend, a couple of little updates from the Bill Belichick UNC start, and then we'll talk about Marshall opting out of the bowl game and why that is obviously a terrible thing, and we'll talk about the schedule a little bit in more detail tomorrow, most likely. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. I'll read your name, read your question, we can have fun back and forth here. We're getting very close to those first round games, so any questions you have about those, I'm more than happy to answer them here. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll talk about the storylines as we head into the CFP. We'll get into the biggest storyline, at least from my perspective, for every team as they head into this thing, and there's quite a few of them for a lot of these teams, so some of them are a little bit are kind of sub storylines. You know, it's a little bit too battling for that top billing, but we'll start with that number one team in the country, and it's all about getting that first title. Oregon's still one of the teams that has not had a national title, probably the best program that has not had a national title, right up there with Wisconsin and West Virginia and a couple others that have had a lot of really successful seasons, have never gotten that ultimate prize. And that's what Dan Lanning, that's what Oregon is looking for this year. If they're going to do it, they got to go a perfect 16-0. They got to be the very first team to go 16-0 in a college football season and win a national title in the process. And it would be an incredible thing to watch. There's no doubt about that. We've watched this team all year. They are as laser focused as I've seen in a really long time for a team that is this new to this world in reality. You know, this new to the upper echelon of college football. A lot of these players, the head coach obviously is new to this. Their ability to keep their cool throughout all of these big time moments throughout the year has been absolutely incredible, and it really does lend itself to them possibly doing that in a further degree throughout this playoff. So a lot of different things that are on the table for this team, a lot of different storylines as you head into this thing, but the reality is, when you're an Oregon fan right now, you're thinking about that first national title. You're thinking about being the team on the top of the mountaintop and totally changing the way that you go about your business going forward, and a lot of people are on college football starting to be a little bit scared of that team up there in Eugene after this year if they can finish this thing off. For Georgia, there's a lot of different things at stake, but Gunnar Stockton stepping in is going to be the biggest storyline heading in. Now, you could very well argue possible third title in 4 years. That might be the biggest storyline heading in, but when you have an injury like Carson Beck and when he goes down and you got to win a title Cardale Jones style, that's exactly what the storyline's going to be. It's going to be whoever the Cardale Jones is in this scenario. This time it's Gunnar Stockton. He has all of the ability in the world. We saw him in different flashes during that SEC championship. The ability is really incredible. He has a ton of ability running the football. Obviously has a little bit more arm strength than Carson Beck. I wouldn't necessarily say he has more arm talent, but absolutely has a little bit more whip on that ball, has a little bit more strength behind that arm. He has all the ability in the world. That's not going to be an issue for this. The question is, how comfortable is he in this system? How comfortable is he stepping out on that field in the very first time? I believe they're down in Miami for the Orange Bowl. Is he going to feel confident? Is he going to feel calm? And can he execute at the level that they're going to need to against a possible defense like Notre Dame, which is very, very tough to deal with, especially for a young quarterback. So this is the far and away, the slam dunk one here, because Gunnar Stockton has a lot on his shoulders, and every Georgia fan is talking about him when they're talking about this playoff. Boise State, we're all going to be watching that number 2. I think we all understand that at this point. We're going to be watching him possibly run to a record and possibly pass Barry Sanders if he gets to 132 rush yards in that game against Penn State or SMU. He will pass Barry Sanders for the most rushing yards in a season in college football history. Would be an incredible thing to watch, and if you think 132 is a little bit too lofty, He went for 133 against Oregon earlier this year. So he has the ability to do it. That's not even a question. He absolutely has history very much in reach. A lot of people questioning if they can make a run to the title, as am I, but the history is not necessarily out of reach if they don't make a little bit of run in this thing. Could be an incredible moment for Ashton Jeanty if you can get to that 132 mark, and then just for fun, see if you can pull an upset and move on to the semifinals. Arizona State, it's just all about silencing the doubters and continuing to do that. They've done it all year. They were picked very, very last in the Big 12 as they were heading into this year, picked 16th in that conference. They are off on their way to the CFP, have won the conference in their very first year, and they're going to be waiting for either Clemson or Texas in that second round matchup. No one's going to pick them. Let's be honest. I think I've seen probably 100 different predictions for how this playoff is going to go. I don't think I've seen a ton with Arizona State in the semifinals. It's either Clemson or Texas, depending on who wins that game for you. They've gotten pretty used to that. They've gotten pretty used to people saying that they're not good enough, that they're not physical enough. They're more than happy to continue to silence doubters, and that's what they're going to try to do throughout this playoff. For Texas, it's the question that's been going around the entire week. We talked about it a ton last week. We'll probably talk about it a ton this week. I apologize, but it's definitely a huge storyline as we head into this thing because this is the overwhelming question. What is going to happen with that quarterback position? First of all, what is the split to start? How much is Quinn Ewers in the game? How much is Arch Manning in the game? Does Arch Manning come in a little bit more in the red zone area? And then on top of that, how quick is the pull on a Quinn Ewers if he does come out and struggle against that Clemson defense to start? Is it one quarter? Is it one half? Does he let him play out that game even if they're shaping up to lose? There's a lot of different questions around this, and definitely one where you're probably going to need to use Arch a little bit more. The question is, how comfortable is Steve Sarkisian of letting him rip the way that a lot of people think that you're going to need to in this playoff? And then if he doesn't come into the game as often as you would think he would, what does that look like for this offense, and how do they function without a possible Arch Manning package involved in this? For Penn State, it's the question that pops up every time around this time of year around James Franklin. Can he win the big one, quote unquote? Can he do the thing that he has really struggled to do? Hasn't beaten that top flight team from the Big 12 or from the Big 10 throughout the last couple of years, and frankly could continue into the CFP, because the question is, a lot of people have been saying this isn't a big game because it's only SMU. It's a college football playoff game. It is a big game. There's no question that it is a big game. So if he were to win it, I would absolutely give him some props. But the reality is, people that are saying it's not a big game, they're basically just saying he cannot lose. And I would tend to agree with them there. They lose, and the narrative is no longer, well, they can't beat Ohio State. They can't beat Michigan. They can't beat Oregon. It's going to be, they can't beat anyone that is on a big-time stage, that is on a big-time moment. They don't have the ability to step up to that moment. That is going to be a huge question for this team, and the narrative will get very, very loud around James Franklin, and definitely some people behind closed doors will be having some conversations. I'm not saying James Franklin's job is on the line this weekend, because I tend to believe it's not, but I'm just saying there will be a lot of interesting conversations being had if they cannot win this one, because they thought Ohio State and Michigan were their bugaboo. Maybe it's just every single big game that you run into. For Notre Dame, it's the thing that could totally change the way that we look at this playoff, which is that pass game showing up. If the pass game becomes what it has the capability of being in some respects, the talent at the wide receiver position is very solid. They do have Mitchell Evans. Riley Leonard's not the passer that you would love to have in this scenario, but absolutely is a guy that can get the ball where it needs to go. The reality is they need to be more explosive. They need to be more dangerous down the football field. They need to be a little bit more, make those safeties, make those linebackers think a little bit more about what they're going to do on the deep balls. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's very, very difficult, especially with how good that run game is and how inconsistent that pass game has been pretty much all year. It's got to take a step forward. There's no way you're going to be able to beat a Georgia or be able to beat a Texas or an Oregon or whoever in the national title if you don't have a pass game to fall back on. You're going to have to get a little bit of that going, whether that's Chris Mitchell or Jaden Greathouse or Faison, whoever that looks like, whoever that is. You're going to have to be able to get a couple of big-time plays down the football field in the pass game, or it's going to be a relatively benign offense. It's going to be one that still has the capability of scoring, probably not to the degree that you're going to need to. So that pass game is going to be huge, and definitely the thing that I'm watching this weekend against Indiana. for Ohio State, it's probably the biggest storyline of the entire weekend, and it is Ryan Day's future. If he loses this game, I fully expect him to be fired on Sunday. Obviously, something that is kind of contentious around Columbus and around a lot of different places. I think this is a fantastic head coach. I think it's very, very unlikely that Ohio State will be able to go out this cycle and go find a better coach, if I'm being totally honest. There are a couple of guys out there that I think they could go after and possibly get. The reality is a lot of those guys are in very, very good positions right now. If you want to try to go back to Urban, doesn't sound like that's going to work out too well for you. So a lot of the replacements have started to sign to extensions, including Marcus Freeman just a minute ago signed an extension with Notre Dame. You got a lot of questions, and it's going to be one of those things where if they lose this weekend, I fully expect him to be let go. I don't know what the steps are after that. So maybe he won't be let go. Maybe the future is not in the balance this weekend, but it really does feel like that if you're an Ohio State fan, and I assume that Ryan Day feels that as well. For Tennessee, does it feel like 1998 this time around? Because there was a lot of this talk around 2022 when Hendon Hooker and that offense was absolutely rolling. They had beaten Alabama. They had gotten over that hump. And they were looking at a possible playoff berth. They were looking at a possible national title. They were looking at so many different things that they possibly could do. And then Hendon Hooker went down, and pretty much everything fell off the tracks. A lot of things went wrong for them. Obviously, this last year with Joe Milton did not go the way that they wanted to. Now they have the quarterback, and they have a better defense, and they have a better run game, and they have probably better coaches just overall from experience standpoint. They're in a position where they got a chance. If they win that first game, if they move on to play Oregon, now the path that they have to go to get to a national title is an absolute nightmare, and then they might have to face one of the teams that took them down earlier in the year in Georgia to do it. But at the end of the day, there is a little bit about this team that was not there in 2022. There is a much higher floor for this team, and there's a much higher ability on defense. Maybe it does feel like 1998 this time around, and maybe it's not about the explosive offense. Maybe it's about the suffocating defense and the run game that they have. Indiana, you just got to change the narrative, and you've been doing it pretty much all year. This is not a team that many people respect, just plain and simple. There's not a team that is going to be picked to win that game on Saturday very often, or Friday, getting a little bit lost in the schedule, but it's not going to be a team that a lot of people pick to go remotely far in this tournament. It's their job to change the narrative. It's their job to change that, shock the world, move on to the next round, and then say you're playing with house money at that point. You're playing a Georgia team that, again, no one's going to pick you against. Just go to work. It's all about every single week. Everyone telling you that you can't do it, and then you go out there and do it. It's obviously kind of a grandiose, kind of abstract idea, but it is a very real one, and definitely one that they're feeling right now in Bloomington. SMU, prove the committee right. That's the goal of this Saturday and really of this entire tournament is you've got to make sure that that committee sits back and says, we made the right decision keeping SMU in over Alabama, because people will question that. Even if they lose by 3 points, people will question it. Those people would be wrong. But at the end of the day, there will be some talk about this. If they lose by 21, if they lose by 14 against Penn State, people will be sitting back and saying, could have been Alabama. Could have put Alabama in there, and it would have made so much more sense. People would have enjoyed it more. It would have been a better product on TV. SMU's job is to prove the committee right. Go up there, put up a really good fight against that Penn State team, and maybe, just maybe, get a win and move on to the next round. And then for Clemson, this is kind of the most grandiose one of the bunch, maybe beyond Ryan Day's future, but Clemson has a chance here where if they win, they are firmly on top of the sport. They are staying on top of the sport for quite some time. If they fall in this one, I think there's some questions around Clemson going forward. You have a Miami team that continues to build, that continues to improve. SMU crashed the party this year and is going to be a problem for years to come. And then you talk about a team like Syracuse, a team like Georgia Tech, a team like Duke that is playing really, really good football right now. Is there enough oxygen in the room for Clemson to stay on top the way that they want to if they were to lose in this this game? Obviously, they're going into the portal this time around. That should help them a little bit to stay on top of the conference, but could this possibly be a little bit of a swan song from this Clemson program for a little bit of time to come if they were to fall in the first round? Because there's a lot of questions around that team, around that program, and around that roster going into 2025. And if they can get a win here, I think a lot of that is subsided. If they can't, then I think a lot of those questions continue to pop up, and Dabo Swinney has a lot of things they has to deal with during the offseason. So a lot of storylines heading into this thing. I think Ryan Day's future might take the cake of the biggest one as we head into this weekend in particular, but I think there's a lot of different ones that we'll talk about throughout this week. I believe I'm doing all my picks on Wednesday, but have debated splitting them up between Wednesday and Thursday. I'll figure it out. We'll do one of those days. Probably on Wednesday, we'll just do a full extravaganza, but a lot of different storylines as we head into this thing, and a lot of different fallouts that could possibly happen if things don't go right up there in Columbus or don't go right in a number of different places. So we'll break it down as it does, obviously, but when we let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about the Heisman. We'll talk about a little bit of a roundup of the Heisman, how some of the reaction is absolutely ridiculous. I'll give you the top 10 voting. I'll give you the ones that I'm watching for next year. A lot of different things to talk about right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the biggest storylines for each team as they head into the CFP. Obviously, Ryan Day's future might just take the cake for this upcoming weekend. We'll be watching that very closely, obviously. But let's get into the Heisman. Let's talk about a little bit of a Heisman reaction here. And Travis Hunter barely took home the Heisman Trophy, and that's probably the way that I saw it, or I thought this should have gone. Frankly, I thought it was going to be a little bit bigger of a margin by the time we got here, but very happy that Ashton Jeanty got a little bit of love here, and it should have been very close, and it was very, very close. It is actually the closest Heisman race that we have had since 2009, when it was Mark Ingram barely edging out Toby Gerhart and Colt McCoy, and to be totally honest, that's probably Ndamukong Suh's Heisman as far as I'm concerned. But at the end of the day, it was the closest one since the 2009 race, and that was a darn good race with a lot of really, really talented running backs in that thing. And then Colt McCoy was one of those guys that found his way to New York quite a bit, it felt like. But really remarkable season from Travis Hunter, no doubt about that. As a wide receiver, was top 6 nationally in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Was absolutely ridiculous on the offensive side of the ball and made plenty of highlight plays, that is for sure. And then as a defensive back, led the nation in coverage grade by per PFF, was tied for 5th nationally in passes defended with 15, 11 pass breakups, 4 INTs. The dude is incredible. He was absolutely remarkable this year, and it's led to some conversations around Twitter, around a lot of the different social media apps, talking about, well, should it have been Ashton Jeanty? It should have been Ashton Jeanty, and it's not even a question. Ashton Jeanty ran away with this award, and if you don't think that he did, then you're wrong in every level. That is ridiculous. I'll be totally honest with you. All due respect to everyone that is saying that. If you think Ashton Jeanty should have won this award, I understand that. He had a remarkable year. I, for much of the year, leaned his direction until towards the end of the year when Travis Hunter just totally took over this thing. But the reality is, the idea that Travis Hunter didn't belong in New York, the idea that Travis Hunter didn't belong anywhere near the Heisman Trophy, is outright ridiculous. Frankly, it might be the most remarkable season I have ever seen. He did things that I did not think was possible, and then he did it 12 times in a row. I didn't think it was possible to do it in one game, much less do it in 12 games where you're playing almost 130 snaps per game, you're all over the field, and not only are you playing 130 snaps, because that's been an idea going around that all he did was play snaps, and that's why he's getting it, he just has stamina. No, he played both positions at a very, very elite level. Speaking conservatively, he was a top 5 cornerback and a top 5 wide receiver this year. So I understand the argument. I understand Ashton Jeanty's argument. He has a very, very good one as far as I'm concerned, and that's why it was this close. But Travis Hunter is your Heisman, and I have really no problem with that. I think the right person won it yesterday, or on Saturday. I think he was absolutely remarkable this year, and it's kind of sparked a debate around what was his Heisman moment this year, because there have been some incredible moments. Let's be totally honest. There was the ridiculous catch against North Dakota State. There was the run against Utah, which felt like kind of the moment where it kind of got solidified as far as I'm concerned. But for me, the biggest one of the bunch was this. It was the fumble that he forced in overtime in the Baylor game. They caught a Hail Mary. LaJohntay Wester made a ridiculous catch that if it falls through his hands, Baylor would have been in the Big 12 championship. So just gives you an idea of how impactful a lot of these plays were. But you get the Hail Mary, you go to overtime, and then Travis Hunter makes this play. He makes the play that knocks the ball out of the back of the end zone, gives them that win, and moves them firmly in position to compete for a Big 12 title. It was a remarkable moment. I think there's a number of different moments that you can choose from for this kid, but that was the moment where it all got very real for me. That was the moment when I said, okay, this might not be a joke anymore. It might not be, one of those guys that just puts up crazy numbers on not that great of a team. They're not going to win a lot of games, and that's going to be that. He was able to get a pretty much, not single-handedly, obviously, but in that moment, single-handedly get a big-time win for his team, and that's when it all got very real for me. That was the one that really stood out, and in my opinion, of this year for Travis Hunter. I would call that his Heisman moment, if you will. But moving forward to the other players, and just wanted to give some love to the other finalists, because Ashton Jeanty put together the best running back season we've seen since Melvin Gordon, and almost a decade ago. Really remarkable season for him. He made Boise State appointment television again, which was really, really fun. I grew up when it was really, it was a big part of college football. Didn't necessarily engage in it too much. The Boise State lore and getting involved with all of those teams that were so incredible to watch, I just didn't quite get into it as much as a lot of other people did. This year I was able to, and it was absolutely incredible to watch. That blue field, that program in general, is such a special one that has so much college football history, and Ashton Jeanty was so incredible. He led the country in rushing by such a margin that his the second leading rusher in the country was Ashton Jeanty after contact. That's how good he was. He was absolutely ridiculous all year. It was insanity to watch him every single week, and that's why it was remarkably close with a guy that has done something we've never seen. Well, this was very close to something we've never seen, and might just be something we've never seen by the time the playoff ends. Dillon Gabriel was the orchestrator of one of the most efficient offenses in the entire country. He was the leader of the only undefeated team in the country, at least in FBS. He did a great, great job. He had a couple of huge moments throughout the year, especially against Ohio State. Had over 3,500 pass yards, 28 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns, only 6 picks. He was remarkably efficient throughout this year, and that offense is one of those things that could just carry him to a national title. Remarkable, remarkable group, and the way that they run offense is just so crisp every single time. Cam Ward had one of these statistical seasons that looks a lot like a lot of Heisman winners from the past couple of years. You compare him to a Jaden Daniels last year or a Joe Burrow from a couple of years ago, it's a little bit off, but not by much. He had over 4,000 passing yards, 36 passing touchdowns, 7 INTs. The dude was absolutely incredible, led the best offense in the entire country, and kept Miami in that CFP race probably a little bit longer than they probably should have been there. But remarkable stuff. We can argue all day about, who should have won, and is Ashton Jeanty, did he get robbed, all of that different type of stuff. That is definitely a conversation that can be had, but I can say this without any question in my voice. If you are one of the 109 people that did not have Ashton Jeanty or Travis Hunter third, or that did have one of those two guys third, go ahead and give up your vote. You don't need to be voting in this thing because those two guys were far and away the two best players in college football this year. And then to the 25 that didn't place a vote this year, go and find a new sport to cover. You do not deserve that vote. You do not deserve to be even remotely near that vote. So go ahead and give it up. Go ahead and move on and cover basketball for the rest of your career, because if you have a Heisman vote and you're not using it, you don't love this sport enough. I'll leave it at that for the time being, but let's get into a couple of different things here, and we'll talk about, firstly, the top 10. And this was kind of an interesting group because I think it's a little bit out of whack, I'll be totally honest. But a cool stat just to start this off, 8 of the top 9 players either started at the G5 or FCS level, Tyler Warren being the one exception. He was the guy that started at Penn State, has been at Penn State his entire time. Kyle McCord, obviously in the top 10 there, absolutely started at Ohio State, made his way over to Syracuse. But all of these guys, Travis Hunter started at Jackson State. A little bit different of a situation, I will give you that. Obviously, a very talented top recruit coming out of high school, so that's a little bit different. Dylan Gabriel started at UCF. Ashton Jeanty is where he started, no doubt about that. Cam Ward came over from Incarnate Word. Cam Scadaboo all the way from Sac State, all the way to the Heisman top 10. Really remarkable stuff. Heisman top 5. Really remarkable stuff from this entire group. 11 different players receive a first place vote, which I don't necessarily fully agree with, but gives you an idea just how incredible this group was. But overall, this order is a little bit out of whack as far as I'm concerned. First of all, the top 2 is the top 2. That's not a question. I'm not questioning that by any means. I would have Cam Ward over Dylan Gabriel here, and frankly, I'd probably knock Dylan Gabriel a couple of spots down. Incredible season from him, not necessarily to the level of a lot of the other guys on this list. So I would put Cam Ward above him. I'd probably put Cam Scadaboo above him. And if you looked at the votes, Cam Scadaboo probably should have been in NYC. There was not enough of a gap between him and Cam Ward to justify him not being there. So that's a total side conversation. But Bryson Daly comes in at 6. Shedeur Sanders should be there as far as I'm concerned. He was absolutely incredible. He had the best statistical season of any quarterback not named Cam Ward. He firmly deserves to be in this list. And then I love Bryson Daly. He could just slide down to the 8 as far as I'm concerned. That would be more than fine. Or Tyler Warren can slot down 1. He can slot down 1. But the reality is Shedeur Sanders should be a lot higher on this list than he is. And then there's one person that just isn't on here that absolutely should be, and it's Cade Klubnik. There's no doubt in my mind that Cade Klubnik should be on this list. I've absolutely loved what Curtis Rourke has done this year. I would slide Cade Klubnik in for Curtis Rourke in a second. It's been a really fun year from Indiana and Curtis Rourke. Cade Klubnik's been on a different level. He deserves to be in this top 10, but overall, you got the 2 at the top right. You got it as close as you possibly should have. I'm all good with that. The after that is a little bit of a worry for me, but obviously not necessarily too big of a deal there. Definitely something that a lot of people will be watching for as we head into next year. And let's talk about next year here for a second and give you 10 guys I'm watching very closely for the Heisman next year. We'll start with Cade Klubnik. He was a guy that obviously I think should have been in the top 10 this year. Obviously, will be back in that offense, be more comfortable. The wide receivers will be a year older. The kid should be able to cook next year. Drew Aller just got some news that he likely will be back next year, and we'll talk about that when we get to the transfer portal segment and talk about how crazy that situation is. But love Drew Aller and his ability. They are a big-time receiver away from him having a Heisman-level season. The kid is absolutely incredible. If they get a difference maker on the outside throughout this portal cycle, I think it could be a really special season for Drew Aller. Arch Manning's obviously one with that ability in that offense. A lot of special things can happen, no doubt about that. Obviously, still a little bit more of a question mark than a lot of the other guys on this list, but a very talented player that in a Steve Sarkisian offense should be able to put up crazy numbers. You have the duo of freshman wide receivers with Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, both guys that I think are going to be absolutely incredible, be far and away their wide receiver ones, and their quarterback will be a first-year starter, which should help them out just a little bit more to stand out among that group. Jeremiah Love is an absolute star in the making in the college football world. The Notre Dame game, the Notre Dame offense, I expect to take a big-time step forward in the pass game next year. I think that just opened lanes for this kid to be absolutely incredible. I think he could have a remarkable year next year and kind of take the world by storm. And then you got the quarterbacks. You got DJ Lagway, who I'm going to be watching very closely. Cannot wait to see what this kid can do. I think he could have a Heisman-type year next year. Kevin Jennings caught everyone's eye next year and is trying to keep them this year and is trying to keep them as they head into next year. And then Lenore Sellers in the same exact situation. And then I'm not picking against a fifth-year LSU guy. If you know any history about fifth-year LSU quarterbacks, you know it goes pretty well for him. So I'm going to definitely lean into Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's a remarkable player, and I think with some of the moves they're making in the portal, he could be very potent next year. But a lot of really incredible guys to watch out for next year, but this year it was Travis Hunter's time. It was absolutely incredible to watch, one of the best seasons that I've ever seen. He did some things that I didn't think were physically possible, and he did them very consistently. So, really remarkable season. We'll get to see him one more time in that Colorado Buffaloes uniform before he moves on to the next level, and probably is a top 5 overall pick. Remarkable player, and definitely comes off a remarkable season with the best trophy in the sport, sans the national title. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to get into all the games that happened this past weekend. We'll obviously start with Army-Navy, a huge one that Navy just kind of dominated in, and then we'll get to a couple of bowl games, we'll get to a couple of FCS games to just give a little bit of love there, but we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the Heisman. Travis Hunter gets a win in a very, very narrow battle with Ashton Jeanty, and made a lot of people on Twitter mad. But obviously, it is over now. Travis Hunter does have his Heisman, and we got some games to talk about. There were some really incredible games this past weekend, and we'll start with one of the greatest ones every single year, one of the best spectacles in the sport, probably the best spectacle in the sport, Army-Navy. An incredible game every single year, absolutely love it, and I picked Army to win this one 31-10. So if you want to just flip those, if you want to just in your mind just imagine that I picked Navy 31-10, this looks like a great pick. This looks like an incredible pick from your guy, but overall, the Navy team just absolutely dominated pretty much from start to finish. Particularly that defense came to play, and I was really worried about that run defense going into this one, but Army's offense averages over 300 yards on the ground per game coming into this one. They had 114 on the ground and 3 yards per carry. That is not what they're used to by any means. So it forced Bryson Daly to throw the ball 16 times, another thing they're not comfortable with, and he threw 3 picks. So it was one of those days where you lose the run game for Army, and things just started to spiral. Things got really out of control in a hurry, and Army just could not get much of anything going, and Bryson Daly made a couple of interesting decisions, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. But when you talk about this game, there's so many different things to talk about. There's so many different people to talk about. But Landon Robinson might have stole the day with a lot of different incredible plays. He was the leading tackler in this game. But beyond that, he took a 29-yard a fake punt. He took 29 yards for a first down, kept a drive going that kind of led to a put-away touchdown. They went up by 15 after that touchdown, and that was kind of all she wrote there. A remarkable call by Brian Newberry in that spot on his own 47, and then Landon Robinson. Boy, can that guy move. He is a big kid, but he can absolutely fly. Really remarkable to watch him fly down the field, and not even that. He was just incredible on that defensive line pretty much all day. I said he had to be a big player going into this game. He might have heard me because he was a massive player in this game. Really remarkable, and that D-line overall was really dominant. The 3 leading tacklers for this game were Landon Robinson, Justin Reed, and Griffin Willis, all on that defensive line. Really, really good when you're playing a triple option team, when you can keep them pinned in, when you can make sure that they're stopped at the line of scrimmage. You're doing a really good thing. And then on that back end, Deshaun Peel, Luke Paris, and Kenneth McShann all came away with picks, but Andrew Duhart, Rayhan Lane played really good football. So this entire defense for Navy did an incredibly good job throughout this thing, really kind of stifled that offense. And then on the offensive side of the ball for Navy, it was Blake Horvath and pretty much no one else. Let's be totally honest. He went 4 for 9, 107 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, including an incredible play call on one of those, and then 25 carries, 204 yards, and 2 scores on the ground. He accounted for all but 73 yards for Navy on the day. ridiculous. The dude was absolutely remarkable early in the season, had a little bit of a lull when they lost a couple of those games, especially that one to Notre Dame, but the reality is he was incredible in this one. He goes off on a really, really great note for this year, and really just an incredible year for both these teams. Really shout out to both these teams. Most combined wins as you come into this game that they've ever had in 125 meetings. Really special teams, really special years for both of them, and Army comes out on a little bit on the wrong side of that Commander-in-Chief trophy. Really remarkable season for them nonetheless. Win their conference in the very first year, get to play a bowl game, and we'll talk about some of the details around that a little bit later in the show, but they do get a bowl game against Louisiana Tech on the 28th. We'll see what happens there. Definitely a late change, so we'll see if that game plan changes a little bit for Army and definitely for Louisiana Tech, but going to be a fascinating next couple of years for these programs. Two coaches that I think are probably going to be around for 2025. There was some talk around Jeff Monken, but with a lot of those jobs kind of being snapped up, doesn't feel like he's going to get one of those big-time jobs unless there is a cascade after a Ohio State loss, possibly. But overall, remarkable. Every time I watch this game, I fall in love with it a little bit more. One of the best spectacles in the entire sport, and Navy comes away with the big-time win here, and now they look forward to a possible big-time moment against Oklahoma in that bowl game. If they can get a win there, a lot of momentum heading into 2025 for the midshipmen. But remarkable game here. It's a remarkable game every single year. The pageantry of that place is just incredible every single time you watch it, but Navy comes out on the right side for the first time, I believe, in about 3 years. So good stuff from the midshipmen, but we got a couple more games that we got to talk about here. Jackson State gets a big-time win. They win what's quote-unquote the HBCU title this past weekend over South Carolina State. Really remarkable game, and the defense was the winner here as well. 178 yards totally given up from the Jackson State defense. They had 2 interceptions, allowed 1.6 yards per carry, and they were all over Eric Phoenix and Ryan Stubblefield throughout this game. They were absolutely incredible. On the offensive side for Jackson State, Jacobian Morgan was really, really good. Had a nice day throwing the ball. 15 for 21, 233, 2 scores, and only 1 INT passing. Irv Mulligan was stifled for a lot of the day. Only had 2.8 yards per carry, but broke through for 2 touchdowns. Was an absolutely huge player for them, but Isaiah Spencer was the guy that you're going to want to watch in this game. He was absolutely incredible. Huge 67-yard touchdown catch, or not touchdown catch, but one that set up a touchdown on the very next play, their second touchdown of the day. And Fortaline, a very talented guy that stole the show with 2 touchdown catches. Really huge win for Jackson State, and they continue to thrive under T.C. Taylor. Has done an incredible job. After Dion left, he did leave a lot of really good things there, but there was a lot of rebuilding that had to be done, and T.C. Taylor has done an incredible job there, and they continue to be the class of the HBCU programs going forward. The bowl game that happened a little bit later in the night was South Alabama, Western Michigan, and South Alabama got a win without their top 2 quarterbacks here. Huge shout out to Bishop Davenport, who stepped up in a big way. 15 for 24, 271, 2 scores throwing the ball in, 85 yards and a score on the ground. Really remarkable stuff from that quarterback in a spot that he probably didn't expect to be in that moment, but was able to step up, and most of those passing yards that he had went to Jeremiah Webb. He was incredible in this game, 184 yards, 2 scores on the day for the wide receiver. Really remarkable stuff. And then Kentrell Bullock, who was stepping up for Fluff Bothwell, who stepped out for the transfer portal. 17 carries, 130 yards, and a score. Really remarkable stuff. The Western Michigan run game did not get going to the degree that they absolutely needed it to, and that it had pretty much all year. Their leading rusher was Jaden Nixon with 45 yards on 11 carries. 36 of those yards came on 1 carry. So he got absolutely stifled. Pretty much everyone in that running back room got stifled, but South Alabama ends their season on the right side of 500, and it looks like Gio Lopez should be back next year, so things are definitely looking very good for the Jags over there in South Alabama. And then Western Michigan, you go 6-6, but the MAC title was very much in reach late into the season. A lot of good things going on for the Broncos as they head into 2025, and if anyone's keeping track, I am 1-1 in my bowl record thus far. I will be keeping track throughout this entire thing. Hopefully, I come out on the right side of 500, but going to be a really interesting thing, and a lot of these bowl games that are relative toss-ups are going to be really hard to pick. But remarkable 2 bowl games we got there. And then just real quickly, got to give some love to the FCS. We have a little bit of a lull here, a little bit of time to talk about some different things, and might as well give some love to the FCS teams that made their way to the semifinals of that tournament this past weekend, and it was a lot in dominating fashion. Montana State started this thing, was absolutely remarkable. Tommy Mellott was incredible, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns on the day. They moved to 14-0 on their season. They've been the best team in the FCS all year, and they continue to be on this day, beating Idaho, and actually their coach over there in Idaho and a big, talented wide receiver have already walked out the door. And we'll talk about those guys in the next couple of days, especially that wide receiver. But the next one, the team that they're going to play will be South Dakota in that semifinal because they were able to take down UC Davis 35-21. Travis Tice had a big-time score with 3 minutes left to kind of put this game away, but really, really remarkable game from both these teams, and South Dakota continues to move on. They're going to face Montana State in hopes that they can knock off that perfect season that they're having. South Dakota State gets a dominating win over Zach Calzada in the incarnate word. Zach Calzada, the old Aggie kind of legend around there at this point, but Mark Ganowski and Griffin Wild connected for 2 touchdowns in this game, and then the run game for South Dakota State is absolutely incredible. 273 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns in this one. They are a remarkable group, and that could be what carries them against North Dakota State, which is who they're going to face off. They were able to get a win in the Fargo Dome from that team down there in Georgia. Mercer came up there and did not have a nice day by any means. Cam Miller was incredible, 259, 2 scores in this one. Really, really special group over there in SDSU, and we'll get to see that NDSU-SDSU matchup when they kind of coinciding with that Penn State SMU matchup. So get that multiple TVs out. That's going to be a really, really fun game with just a little bit of bad blood between those two programs. So wanted to give a little bit of love to the FCS real quick. We obviously have a little bit of a lull before we get into that first round CFP game. So figured I'd give some love over that direction. They definitely do deserve it. But let's take our second break here, I believe. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the transfer portal. We'll talk about all the different things happening around there. Definitely a ton of commitments and a ton of intel. So we'll have to roll through it pretty quickly, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the games that happened this past weekend, gotten into Navy just dismantling Army in a lot of different ways, got into the FCS quarterfinals, a lot of different things happening around this time of year. But let's get into the transfer portal because this is another thing that is happening right about now, and there have been a lot of commitments that have happened over the last little bit. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and we'll start over there in College Station. Julian Humphrey has officially committed to Texas A&M, a big-time pickup for this back end where you have Will Lee coming back next year if Bryce Anderson returns as well. This could be a really, really good back end. Julian Humphrey had some tough moments throughout the year, did get benched later on in the year for Daniel Harris, but a very talented player, no doubt about that, and definitely a guy that can make a big-time difference in this back end going into 2025. Dylan Teneman is a very talented safety that is one of the more complete players in this entire portal cycle. He is on his way to Oregon, a big-time pickup for the Ducks, and they didn't stop there. They also got Theron Johnson, a top 3 corner that is coming out of Northwestern. Very, very talented player, so that back-end rebuilding is officially starting to happen. You're going to have a lot of those guys that you brought in last cycle that are going to be walking out the door this time around, and you're going to have to replace them. They got 2 really, really talented players. Love this player here that absolutely is one of the more complete safeties that you will find in the entire country. Then we got the quarterbacks. Miller Moss has officially made his decision. He will be a Louisville Cardinal, and this is a big-time pickup for Jeff Brom because Louisville has been just a transfer quarterback realm since Jeff Brom took over. The first year it was Jack Plummer, and it really worked. They got to the ACC Championship, did some really remarkable things. Then it was Tyler Shuck, and it sort of worked. It was a little bit more up and down. They missed some marks here and there, but I think Miller Moss is better than both of those guys. I think he has all the ability in the world, and I think this offense makes a ton of sense for a guy with his skill set. I think he might just explode next year, and Louisville might just be a team right back there in Charlotte at the end of the year. As well as that, Jackson Arnold made the decision he is going to end up at Auburn, and it's not the one that I expected. I thought he was going to end up in Starkville for Mississippi State, but at the end of the day, he is going to be a Tiger, and this is a huge pickup. No doubt about that. It's not necessarily the perfect fit for that offense necessarily, given his skill set, but at the end of the day, if he can avoid picks like he had an issue with this year, if he can avoid some turnovers, they can be really dangerous downfield. With those wide receivers, with his arm strength, they absolutely have the ability to be a very explosive team. Can they avoid those turnovers is still going to be a question as you head into this year, but a very talented guy nonetheless, and definitely will give that explosivity to that offense. Michael Van Buren was one of the ones that went a little bit under the radar. He is committed to LSU, and this is another tough hit for Mississippi State in this transfer portal class that just keeps coming for Mississippi State, frankly. But a huge get for LSU. This will be Garrett Nussmeier's successor once he does leave, and I think this kid is incredible. I think the ceiling is remarkably high. Now he has a little bit of time to develop, get a little bit better of a passer. He's a remarkable player. I think he could do incredible things at LSU, and now he's got a little bit of time to figure out the offense, understand what's in front of him, and then I think just let it rip in 2026. But they got some much-needed depth at that position, and Michael Van Buren is a huge pickup for LSU. Kevin Coleman, another hit to Mississippi State, was Kevin Coleman leaving, and he ended up where we expected him to end up at Missouri. A huge pickup for the Missouri Tigers. They obviously are losing Luther Burden, losing Theo Weiss to the NFL this year, so need some replacements. They got a big-time one here. This is a very talented player, one of the more underrated guys in the entire SEC. Definitely a guy that can make a difference in that offense pretty much immediately, and it doesn't sound like Missouri's over getting a couple of wide receivers, and we'll talk about that obviously in the coming days. Tanner Koziel, one of the top tight ends that's in the portal right now, or no longer in the portal. He is committed to Wisconsin, a really talented pass catcher, and definitely can give that Wisconsin pass game just kind of a good baseline. Give you that kind of security blanket that gives you those 5-10 yards when you absolutely need them. I think this kid's going to be a household name next year. He is a remarkable player, and just the fact that he was Ball State was the only reason that people didn't know his name this year. He's a remarkable player, and cannot wait to see what he can do at Wisconsin. And then we got to talk about some teams, because Ole Miss has started their move, and they will probably end with another top 5 transfer portal class if I had to imagine. But they got Prince William, a huge pickup. The brother of Princely definitely was one of those that they felt pretty confident about when he jumped in. They officially locked him up this past weekend. And then a trio of Razorbacks. You got Jalen Braxton, a talented corner. You got Luke Haas, a very good tight end that I like a lot. And then Patrick Kudas, one of the best interior offensive linemen in the portal right now. They are all committed to Ole Miss, and I have to imagine some more are coming. But Luke Haas is a huge pickup here. Definitely can fill the void that Caden Priestcorn will leave this year, and definitely a big-time pickup for Ole Miss, and it's not stopping anytime soon if you had to imagine. LSU, a big-time week for LSU, where I called them losers at the end of last week. They definitely heard me because they got some big-time players. On top of Van Buren, which we already talked about, they got Bauer Sharp, an Oklahoma tight end. They got Barry and Brown, which is a huge pickup and definitely could be a game-changer for that offense, especially with Garrett Nussmeier's ability to push the ball downfield. Jakeem Jackson, a Florida cornerback. Jamari Butler, a Nebraska edge. All positions that they very much needed to be filled. They got some really talented guys to fill them. Texas did a nice job in the portal this past weekend, and they're trying to continue that into this week. They pick up Brad Spence, a very talented linebacker from Arkansas, Jack Boomeister, a very talented punter that was all Big 12 a year ago at Utah, and then you got Cole Brevard, a Purdue defensive tackle, very physical guy, definitely a position that they very much needed to fill. They got a big-time player there, and they host Eric Singleton this week, the top player in the entire portal, the top wide receiver. If they can get a commitment from him, then this portal class looks really good for Texas as you head into 2025. And then Texas Tech, and this was a huge one. They picked up 6 commitments thus far throughout the portal cycle, highlighted by Reggie Virgil, the very talented wide receiver from Miami of Ohio. Bryce Pollock, also coming over from Mississippi State, is huge at the cornerback position. A really elite group being put together by Joey McGuire and company, and definitely builds up for this guy right here, who made his commitment yesterday, the very talented wide receiver, Micah Hudson. He is on his way to College Station. He is going to be an Aggie next year, a big-time pickup for Mike Elko and that staff. They need difference makers on the outside. If they can combine him with Jerome Miles, could be a very potent offense. If they can get that pass game going, which has been a little bit of a struggle around there for the last little bit, but definitely some very talented pass catchers to go after right now. And then we'll get to the intel, and Beau Pribla definitely starts this one off. He is transferring out of the Penn State program. He is leaving before the CFP. This is not his fault, plain and simple. I understand there will be some people that will throw blame at him. They will draw comparisons between him and Devin Brown and a couple other guys that are doing the same thing but staying with their team through the portal. I promise you there's not the same offers on the table for those guys that there is for this guy. He is a very, very talented player, and the terrible calendar just continues to hurt these kids and put them in terrible positions. He said as much. It was an impossible position for him to be put in, and he made the decision that he felt was best. It's an absolute nightmare position to be put in, and I think he handled it okay. It's one of those things that we'll probably get into more detail about how they just have to fix December in general in the college football world, but another quarterback that has to leave his team just a little bit earlier than he probably wanted to, because that's the world that we live in right about now. But moving forward, Mario Craver is another Mississippi State wide receiver that found his way out of that program, and he's making travels around all the SEC, LSU, Alabama, a lot of different teams that are very much involved for this kid, but it sounds like a commitment could be coming soon. Visits are still kind of happening around him, so we'll see what happens there, but definitely a guy that a lot of guys want to get their hands on. Feels like Alabama and LSU are leading the way right about now, but a lot of teams that are still very much involved for this kid. Eric Singleton, we talked about it. He will be in Austin today and tomorrow, and then I believe he is off to Coral Gables. That's the other top 5 team that he has not visited yet. Once he's visited them, all the visits are done. The top 5 is officially taken care of, and then it's just decision time. We'll see what happens there. We'll see if he makes it to Coral Gables. Texas has been really, really good about getting a guy on campus and getting a commitment before they leave. If they can get one here, that would be absolutely huge for the Longhorns. Then Eric Rivers, really remarkable player, top 5 receiving yard wide receiver in 2023. He's making his rounds, and he'll actually be in Atlanta this next weekend for Georgia Tech, and would be a huge, huge commitment for them to replace that Eric Singleton void that will be absolutely massive next year. But this would be a very talented guy to bring in and make a little bit of a difference in this offense. Then you have a guy like Dane Key, and Ole Miss is the new name to watch here, as you can imagine. Ole Miss is going to be around this thing a lot, but UGA and Nebraska seem to be the teams that are still sort of in this thing, but he's coming off a visit from Oxford this weekend, and I have to imagine that Ole Miss is the leader in the clubhouse right about now. They're going to be really, really tough to beat out the rest of the way. Deuce Robinson, the USC transfer, is on the road, and he has made his way to Tempe, Arizona. He is at Arizona State and was there this past weekend. Sounds like they are the pretty comfortable favorites right about now. In fact, a commitment could be coming here pretty soon with this one. But they also, Arizona State also pick up Noble Johnson, a very talented Clemson wide receiver transfer, so they're picking up the slack in the transfer portal right about now, but this would be an absolute get. This would make that wide receiver core just ridiculous going into 2025 with him and Jordan Tyson. Kanye Udo, the Army running back, has entered his name into the portal. Yes, you can transfer out of service academies. I know that sounds crazy. You absolutely can. There is an ability to do that. But Kanye Udo was a very highly touted guy coming out of high school. I assume he will be a highly touted guy in the portal. He is someone that if you need a little bit of running back depth, if you need a little bit of running back help, he could be a huge, huge piece to that. I don't think there's a team that won't look at this kid, if I'm being totally honest. Very, very talented guy, and you go all the way up to Texas. That might need a little bit of running back help. I could definitely see them giving a call to this kid. Another running back that has been on the market for a little bit and already has a ton of names around him is Justice Haynes, a very talented running back from Alabama, one of my favorite running backs really in the entire country. I think the ceiling of this kid is absolutely ridiculous. It sounds like Ohio State and Michigan are two teams battling it out. He also set visits for Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Florida, so those are kind of the 5 teams to keep an eye out on. I would definitely keep an eye out on Michigan in this one. Feels like they definitely need that running back position to be filled a little bit. They add him to Bryce Underwood. That could be a very, very fun backfield for the Michigan Wolverines in 2025. Max Clare is a guy you're going to want to watch, the top tight end in the portal right about now. He's starting to make his rounds. He was at Texas A&M this past weekend. Sounds like Louisville might be the team to watch for this one. They've gotten a couple of crystal balls from guys around that program. That would be a huge pickup for Miller Moss early on in this time around Louisville. If they could pick up this kid, that would be absolutely huge and definitely would help out their passing game heading into 2025. And then Georgia. An interesting thing that has been happening around the portal right about now is Georgia's very interested in a lot of different quarterbacks out there. They're hosting Dylan Lonergan, the Bama transfer and actually in-state product from Brookwood High School, this upcoming weekend. And then the rumored to be in for Fernando Mendoza, the Cal transfer that has been very highly touted by a number of NFL scouts. It seems like they're in for that guy as well. So a little bit of added pressure for Gunnar Stockton as he heads into this thing that your job next year is not locked down by any means. So a lot of different things on his mind as he heads into this thing, and it could just be another quarterback breathing down his shoulder. So a lot of different things heading into this one, and definitely something that we'll monitor is that quarterback situation over there in Athens, Georgia. But just to give you an idea of the guys that are still on the board, we talked about Eric Singleton, we talked about Deuce Robinson. Luke Kromenhoek just became a lot more important to Jeff Lebby and the guys over there in Starkville because they very badly need a quarterback. This might be the guy that they have the inside track on right about now. Dane Key, Nick Anderson are still out there. Nick Anderson could be an A&M guy. Definitely something to watch there. Some different things pointing in that direction. Fernando Mendoza still kind of making his round. Takario Davis has been really quiet since he's entered. I feel like Texas has the lead there with the defensive coordinator making his way over there in Johnny Nansen, but we'll see what happens there. Jaheim Otis feels like it's all Colorado at this point. Casey Concepcion starting to make his rounds. Feels like Alabama and Colorado are the two to really watch there. Definitely some teams that are still very much in it, but those two have really stood out to me. And then Micah Hudson, I had him on here. He's no longer available. He is committed to A&M, so a lot of different guys coming off the board, and that will continue into this week and likely will start to temper down until we get to the end of bowl games. And a lot of different guys pop in for the couple of days that are open after that, but definitely a lot of questions around the transfer portal still to be had. A lot of commitments. A lot of commitments coming in, but this is just the start. No doubt about that, and we'll break it down as it continues to develop. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got a little bit of a headline roundup from this past weekend. We got some Bill Belichick updates. It's been a very, very nice couple of days around Chapel Hill. We'll talk about Marshall opting out of their bowl game. We'll talk about the coolest trophy that I've ever seen in my entire life, and all of that stuff right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal, a million things to update you on there, and I'm sure there'll be a million more on Wednesday, so we'll wrap back around that when we need to, but let's get into a little bit of a weekend headline roundup because there's a lot of different things that happened this past weekend. We'll talk about that Marshall opt-out here in a second, but I wanted to start over there in Chapel Hill. I wanted to start with Bill Belichick, give you a little bit of an update of what has been happening over there, and it's been pretty nice. It's been a very, very nice start to the Bill Belichick era, as you would assume, but the biggest domino that has fallen thus far is Bryce Baker, the very, very talented quarterback commit. He is officially signed this past weekend. A huge, huge thing for UNC fans that were a little bit nervous that he might be shopping his options just a little bit, might be looking a little bit elsewhere. You get this guy in the door and he immediately signed for that program. Huge. This cannot be overstated. He could be the starter for the entirety of the time that Bill Belichick is there at UNC. He has the ability to beat out Jacoby Criswell, to beat out Max Johnson for that starting job in 2025, and he might just be the thing that defines that Bill Belichick era more than just about anything else. So cannot be overstated, cannot love this kid more. Bryce Baker is an absolute monster, and I definitely think he's going to be a huge piece for this UNC team moving forward. Definitely huge to get him officially in the books and definitely on your team for 2025. But a lot of the different updates, a couple of guys have officially decided to come out of the transfer portal, including starting center Austin Blosh, including starting guard Aiden Banfield, but the biggest one of the bunch is Amari Campbell, the starting linebacker. He had 72 total tackles, 6.5 sacks this year. He's a remarkable player, and definitely in a Bill Belichick defense, could absolutely thrive, could become a Sunday player very, very quickly. He might already be a Sunday player as far as I'm concerned, but definitely with one more year, him, Camion Rucker, a lot of the guys on that defense, it feels like they're definitely responding, at least in the short term, to what Bill Belichick is selling right about now. Obviously, there's still a lot of things to be figured out. The transfer portal has been a little bit quiet. You've seen a couple of visits kind of pop up to UNC, and definitely they'll start to heat that up over the next week or so. This coaching staff news is still slowly rolling in. It sounds like behind the scenes there are some big-time names that could be joining him over there in Chapel Hill, so we'll keep you updated with all of that type of stuff, but it sounds like there was a lot of different things that led up to this, but one of the interesting things that did come out this past week, and I believe it came out yesterday actually, was there were reports that he was very interested in that Jets opening in the NFL, called to see what the interest was there, and then UNC really accelerated things. So if that internal struggle that we talked about at UNC that was definitely going on throughout this process, if that carried on for another 24 hours, Bill Belichick might be up there in New York City, and then they're still trying to find a head coach, or maybe John Sumrall has taken over at UNC. So a very, very different world, but we're probably about 12, 24 hours from that possibly happening. So a little bit of wrinkle into this thing, but UNC fans, you got your coach. You don't have to worry about that for the time being. But some other coaching updates to keep an eye out on. Rashad Samples is officially out of the Sam Houston State head coaching search. This kid is a star. This guy is a star. He is older than me. I don't want to be disrespectful, but he's a remarkable player or coach. He's definitely a rising star in the college football world. He is going to be a head coach before too long, but has decided to stay at Oregon for another year. I feel like that's probably the right decision for him. If I had to imagine, I think there would be some bigger jobs calling this time next year if I had to imagine for him. That leaves only Sam Houston, Ohio, and Central Michigan as the open jobs right about now on the head coaching market. Once those are filled, that could be it for the entire cycle, which would be pretty incredible. It would be a crazy thing to watch. And then if Ohio State falls, then it could just be the beginning. So obviously we'll keep you updated there, but definitely a lot of things that could happen, a lot of things that might just be wrapping up here pretty soon. Over to West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez officially the head coach, and almost immediately he was calling Josiah Trotter to see if he would come back from the portal, come back to Morgantown and be their starting linebacker, and it sounds like that door is still very much open. He's taken visits to Washington and Missouri already, so still a lot of questions around that. Definitely will be something to watch, but it sounds like he is at least somewhat open to possibly coming back. The question is, who's going to be his DC? And there's a couple of guys to watch there. It sounds like Zach Alley is a guy to watch, the former Jacksonville State defensive coordinator under Rich Rodriguez and the current Oklahoma co-defensive coordinator. This dude's a star. This is the guy that I would go all out on and trying to get. He is absolutely incredible. Not sure if he would leave the position he has right now to take the DC job there, but absolutely incredible coach. Definitely going to be a head coach in his future, and if West Virginia can get him, they should go out and get him. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. And then Jeremiah Johnson, another guy to watch, the Louisiana Tech defensive coordinator, has done an incredible job there. Did an incredible job against NC State earlier this year, against Arkansas earlier this year. Very, very talented guy. So can't really go wrong with either of these guys. I lean a little bit more towards Zach Alley, but at the end of the day, both really, really talented guys, and whichever one they get, I think is going to be able to build a very good defense up there in Morgantown. Then we got to talk about Marshall. This was kind of the big story of the weekend. Marshall has officially opted out of the Independence Bowl against Army because they just don't have enough guys. They don't feel confident that they can send guys out there in a healthy and competitive way when they go out there on the field, and I tend to agree with them. When you look at that roster right about now and all the guys that have transferred out since Charles Huff has left for Southern Miss, it makes sense. It's an absolute nightmare what's going on with that roster right about now, and yet another inkling of why this schedule and why this way we're going about business right now in the month of December in college football is all types are wrong. You have an entire team that is deciding that they can't play another game, and you have some seniors on that team that don't get to play football. for the rest of their lives. They don't get to play competitive football ever again, and they did not know that going into this week. They officially know that now. That is absolutely devastating to all of those guys. It's not on Charles Huff. It's a lot on the administration over there at Marshall for handling that situation very poorly. It's even more on the schedule of college football right now, the calendar that we have right now. You just have to move the portal opening to spring. Obviously, there's a little bit different of a circumstance because he did leave. The portal would open for them because your head coach had left, but I promise you, there would not be nearly as many guys walking out the door if they didn't feel like they had to walk out the door to get what they need, to get a starting spot, to get a certain amount of money from the NIL collective, to get these things that a lot of these other guys are getting around the market. Same reason why Bo Pribla is making the decision that he's making is he has an offer on the table. He has something on the table from some school that is willing to give him X amount of money. They wouldn't be willing to give that to him if he were to play in the CFP. That is the issue with the schedule right now. We're making these kids make decisions that they probably don't all that much want to make, but it's just the schedule that's making them, that's forcing them to make them. So obviously, Charles Huff leaving had a big time effect on this. A lot of players are going to follow him to Southern Miss, including probably Braylon Braxton, if I had to imagine, the talented quarterback. So a lot of different things that went into this. Obviously, it's not all on the NCAA. It's not all on Marshall. It's not all on Charles Huff or these players. It's just one of those things. That's kind of the reality of college football right now. The month of December is an absolute nightmare, and it's forcing things like this to happen. Forcing things like seniors that really wanted to play that last game against Army, get one more chance to put on that jersey. They never get to do that again, and that's an absolute nightmare. It's something that none of those kids should have to deal with. But overall, it opened a door for Louisiana Tech to get a little bit of a berth into that postseason. They will be facing off against Army in Shreveport, and you better be lucky that Louisiana Tech is in Shreveport, because that's probably the only way that this was able to happen. Really great that this is still going to be able to be played even without Marshall, but you just hate it. It's the reality of December in the sport. We'll break it down in a little bit more detail tomorrow, but it's one of those things that I don't really blame Marshall. I don't really blame those kids. I blame just about everything around this situation that has forced this kind of world to be possible in the college football world right now. And then Donovan Edwards, he has officially opted out of the bowl game against Alabama, the ReliaQuest Bowl, and he is likely heading on his way to the NFL draft. No official statement has been made there, but you would have to imagine that's where he's heading. A tough blow for Michigan, no doubt about that, but they do have Khalil Mullings. He will likely be playing in this game, so shouldn't be necessarily a problem, but his Michigan career comes to an end as the second all-time receiving yards for a Michigan running back, only 13 behind Anthony Thomas. He had almost 800 receiving yards on his career. Really remarkable player, but he will be remembered for that performance against Washington, the 2 touchdowns. Really remarkable player, and then got to lift that trophy, but maybe more than anything else, he was 4-0 against Ohio State. That's the most important thing over there at Michigan, and he was able to do that, but it feels like we haven't seen as many opt-outs this year. That's something that I kind of noticed when I was reading this, is we've seen a couple of guys jump into the portal and leave their teams and things like that, but no straight-up opt-outs. No guys that just say, I'm not going to play, I'm going to move on to the NFL. Obviously, we will have some. I don't doubt that by any means, but it does feel like it's tempered down from last year, which is a very, very cool thing to see. And then finally, we got to talk about the trophy, guys. We got to talk about this Pop-Tart trophy because it is a toaster. The entire trophy is a toaster, and it's the coolest thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. I'll be totally honest, I've not had that cool of a life, but this is awesome. This is the coolest thing in the world. This is something that should be the national championship trophy. This is something that I would be telling my grandkids about because this is so cool. I am in love with this trophy. Whoever gets to lift that thing up, congratulations. You just got the coolest honor of maybe the entire college football season, including the Heisman, including the national title. This one's special. Cannot wait to see that thing be unveiled. As long as they don't toast one of the mascots again, I think we're in good shape. They have a toaster now. Just use normal Pop-Tarts. We don't need to see the mascot go down there and get toasted. Just plain and simple. But remarkable trophy. Absolutely love that. Had to include that in the show today because it just made me really happy. But at the end of the day, that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything you need need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. We will be back tomorrow to talk about the nightmare that is December, to update you on some of the first round questions. A lot of stuff coming tomorrow, though. We'll see you then at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I'll see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my